Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today at the Hopenning, the place where hope is happening. And this is episode 65. The Hopenning is a space that Fran, my dear friend, and I created about a year and a half ago when we just felt that the world needs more hope, a bigger focus on hope. Fran lives in northern Alberta, Canada, and she has been a teacher for the last 34 years. She will be retiring very soon, and she's counting the days. And she does part-time rapid transformational therapy, and I do that full-time. My name is Marina. I am in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and I do rapid transformation full-time, and I am a clinical hypnotherapist. We both do this work because we really love to give people hope, people who are hurting, people who live in life without hope, and we help them to find that place of hope in their lives. We are so privileged to share this space with so many amazing people who share the message of hope with us. And we have a wonderful guest with us today, and Fran has the honors to introduce her.
Thank you, Marina. It's great to see you again. And it's great to see Marie DiMenna here with us today. Marie is a creative writer, therapist, social worker, and ordained minister in the Christian mystical tradition. She graduated in 2010 with a Master's of Social Work from the University of Kansas. Her poem, Recovery Poem, is published in Occupational Therapy magazine, and Fierce Compassion, Deep Devotion is Marie's first book. So she joins us here from Philadelphia today, and it's a pleasure to have you. We've never had a guest before who is a poet, a published poet. So welcome, welcome. And Marie, you haven't had the easiest life of all, just like most of the people that Marina and I have. So there's never an easy journey, is there? So what was your journey of going from zero to where you are right now as a published poet?
Well, thanks for asking. And I also just want to say that I love how you put that nobody has an easy journey. I think that's so key to remember. You know, the grief expert David Kessler says that the worst pain is your pain. You know, that there really isn't a comparison. But to answer your question, you know, I'd be happy to tell you a little bit about my journey. So when I was 3 years old, I was burned by a shower, and the shower was 140 degrees because we were at my parents' friend's house. So the water pressure was turned up, and the water temperature was turned up very high. And I was told not to go in the shower. And as a curious 3-year-old, you know, wanted to find out, you know, why couldn't I go in the shower? So, you know, that was obviously a traumatic experience. And I was in a burn unit at a hospital after that. And I feel that, you know, it was definitely an event that shaped my life and led to some significant mental health issues growing up. And I also wasn't very good at making friends. And as a kid, never really saw the connection between, you know, going through depression and trauma and how that could possibly lead to, you know, the difficulty making friends. So there was a point in time in fifth grade where I just stopped talking to my classmates altogether, gave up hope. I was sent to the school counselor, but I only had one session. So, you know, it's as you know, as a hypnotherapist, it's really hard to fully address issues in one session. So that difficulty with depression and difficulty fitting in, making friends, really continued, you know, even into my high school days. And I think, you know, in college and as adults, I gradually got better at making friends. And I feel that what really helped me, you know, develop stronger social skills and learn how to have lasting friendships were really the good examples of other girls and women around me in whatever communities I was in. You know, in high school, that was my high school class, college, my college class. When I graduated college, I was involved in a close-knit spiritual community, the Christian mystical tradition that I'm now ordained in. So I think seeing good examples of people, women that just made other friends easily really helps me. And then just learning from my mistakes of learning, oh, maybe I shouldn't say that, maybe I shouldn't do that. And then also having the vulnerability to, not just abandon or leave friendships when things are difficult, and to really, really work through issues. So in college, I started having some manic episodes, which are, for those that don't know, are periods of psychosis, often very euphoric experiences where people can have delusions, or, see things that aren't really there, hear things that aren't really there. So I was hospitalized for my mental illness, beginning in college. And I think that all of these experiences have really given me an understanding for people that feel like they don't belong, and has also led to my career in mental health. So, I'm a mental health therapist. And for me in my 20s, a large part of being a part of my uh, spiritual community was, overcoming trauma and being able to heal from the trauma that I'd experienced. Because I think too, and I know as hypnotherapists, you might have found this too, that it can be easy in society to think that trauma looks like a particular thing, that trauma is something that happens to war vets or people that have been sexually abused. We have maybe some very narrow definitions of trauma, where there's a lot of things that are traumatic outside of this, such as, people that have a loved one with severe medical issues. For me, not having, oftentimes just having very few friends growing up, for me, that was traumatic. Bullying, the bullying I faced was traumatic. And so for me, I think it was really important to be able to move beyond the depression, and to have, another experience in life. And I always had, happy times in between the depressive episodes. But I feel that learning mindfulness in my spiritual community was so key. That was pretty much the first step of overcoming the depression. If I could just really be present to what I was feeling, if I could somehow be with the feelings, and be self-compassionate and be curious, as funny as that sounds, then I would either not feel depressed, or I would feel less depressed. And, that was an evolving practice of becoming more skilled of, being with the feelings. The way I look at it is the analogy of a little kid. So if a little kid has a loving parent to comfort them when they're sad or upset, or if they're, they fall down, something like that, that if that child has a loving parent to nurture and soothe them, the child's going to be better off than if they have no one there to comfort them and help them self-regulate. So I think that happens within us too, that we're better off if we can be present with our feelings, if we can be compassionate, if we can have the willingness to work through our feelings, than to just push them away.
It's kind of holding space for ourselves, right? Rather than just picking ourselves up and brushing ourselves off and get back to work or get back to whatever it was we were doing. Just the ability to make that time to hold space, not just for others. I mean, I think most women do that quite well. I think it's just this nurturing thing that God gifted us with. But for ourselves, that's a different story, especially as women, when there are so many other people. My job, as a teacher, your job as a social worker, Marina, you've worked in the school system before. We know what it's like. Our gift, I guess, is our nurturing ability for others. And yet we have a hard time taking the time for ourselves until until it's like you said, we end up burnt out or at some type of end of our rope in one reason or another. I really like your poetry because your poetry speaks to a gambit. I mean, when I read the book, when I read through it last night, I thought, you know, there's not just poetry here about sadness. There's poetry here about depth of happiness and really surrendering to higher power, God, anyone's version of, okay, I can't take it anymore. I can't take it anymore, but I think there's a higher power that can help me through this. Um, what have you found is like through the Christian mystical community, the tradition there? Like I'm not familiar with that at all. Just can you speak about that a bit? Because I'm from the Catholic faith, so
Uh-huh.
we have our own version of, like you said. But what within yours? Because that's piquing my interest.
Sure, I'd be happy to explain further. So Christian mysticism, like the Catholic Church, we do honor both Mary and Jesus as our masters and our mediators. And then we also look to Father, Mother God, or Creator God, and the Holy Spirit, the sacrament of communion, in which Jesus gave his body and blood. That's an important part of our tradition as well. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the focus is also on, having our teachers and ministers help us overcome, the difficulties we faced, the traumas that we faced. And I talk in my introduction about how, if we can heal from our pain, then that is a service to the world, because then we're cultivating a sense of peace. And I mean, we're better off ourselves when we heal, but I think other people are in our lives and in the world are also better off if we can forgive. And it's not that we're not going to ever come back around to the issues. Just like if we have a loved one that passed away, an anniversary 10 years later could be difficult. It's not to say that we're never going to have pain, but that if we can heal from the challenges we face, I think that it opens up space inside of us for peace, for being more available for other to help others in our lives. So that's a key component as well. And we have the first step of our path is baptism. So that's a process of looking at, and preparing for the baptism. Each member looks at who do they need to forgive, where are the places in their lives that they need forgiveness, and where has God been present throughout their lives. Um, so in my specific community, there's different mystical communities throughout the U.S. It is a pretty small tradition. It's non-denominational. In my tradition, part of the hope that we want to bring to the world is trusting and believing in what Charles Eisenstein in his book refers to as the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. So it can be, very easy for any of us to be overwhelmed with the world's problems, or to just distance ourselves. That's kind of the opposite end of either feeling overwhelmed or then saying like, I just can't. And some of that I think is good, to take a news break when we need a news break. I know years ago my cousins were saying on Facebook that they were watching Frozen because they just needed a break from the news. And I think those breaks are good, but at the same time, we don't want to just say, well, I'm just not going to look at it ever. I'm not going to, acknowledge the fact that there's war, or, in the US, we've had so many school shootings. So, being able to, again, it's just like we were talking about with our own pain, being that compassionate presence where, as I talk about in the intro to my book, of course, we're going to have our feelings come up, But if we can be able to approach the world's issues with compassion and hope, and not a continual sense of anger. I mean, some of that anger is needed. You know, we wouldn't have had the civil rights movement in the US if it didn't start with a sense of anger at what was happening. You know, there's anger regarding, you know, the war in Ukraine, school shootings, hunger, poverty. That all makes sense. But for me, this idea of the more beautiful world is possible has been an interesting journey, because for me, at first, it was just a belief. And then I could really tap in and start to see it. And oh, like, here's what the more beautiful world is. So I can give the example of, I was listening to um, some musicians that are part of a Hindu group that the Christian mystical community is friends with and has been friends with over the years. And these two musicians were just singing this beautiful music. And I just thought, oh, you know, their music is about inclusion and about community, and that we already have the more beautiful world that we're longing for. It's just we need more of it, you know, more of what Hopenning is doing to bring people together with hope. So for me, even if it might sound, you know, hocus pocus to some people, you know, focusing on the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible, at the same time, it's great to not have to just be, you know, have not to just have the perspective of maybe the what the newspapers are projecting, because I think that the news outlets, you know, we need to be informed, but we also don't need to just have a perspective that doesn't include, you know, that spiritual perspective. You talk about a higher power. That I think, you know, the flip side of the fact that there's all these intense labor pains in the world right now, that we see, you know, so many things are coming to light, and that's a very intense, at times very painful process for the world. But on the flip side, we're actually going through such growth right now in the world. And that as we transition from, you know, the Piscean age to the Aquarian age, that's a huge thing. You know, just like each year we celebrate the new year, and in you know, each decade of our lives we say, okay, I'm turning 40, I'm turning 50, and you know, another decade, and it's a big milestone. So I think the earth has this big milestone now, and that we might not hear enough about. You know, we're making progress and we're a part of this spiritual evolution.
Yeah. I found my favorite poem that you wrote. Is it okay if I read it?
Oh, that would be such an honor. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So,
Sure.
life is a bed of roses. Whoever told you life isn't a bed of roses lied to your face. Life is a bed of roses. The sun to nourish, the soil to provide nutrients, the stem, the connector, the thorns to prick and pierce, the leaves falling to the ground, each petal a portion of the whole. We admire and are in awe of the rose in full bloom. I just thought was just wonderful. You know, it kind of put it all together, right? I mean, sometimes we think life it should be just the petals part, right? But you
Mhm.
wouldn't have a rose if you only had petals. You would have a wedding, maybe the flower girls throwing petals around, but that's not a marriage. So when you get the full rose, you get the thorns with it, you get everything, but you learn how to hold it. I think you learn how to hold the rose so that you can see the thorns, you can see it all in its entirety, but and never fully, right? Because the roots are
Mhm.
what grow that. The roots are what grow it. The sun is what grows it. The rain, the nutrients. So I believe it's a beautiful poem, and it really is. Pulls a lot into it. It pulls a lot of what life is truly all about. I think we do a disservice with the YouTuber who has 12.4 billion hits or whatever. We think that that's real life. And unfortunately, you know, I'm not sure if I've told Marina this before, but, and you might know this too, Marie, the number one, when you ask kids in North America, Canada as well as America, what they want to be when they grow up, number one, an influencer, a YouTube influencer. Wow. You know, like, all I can say is,
how
wow.
things have changed. Yeah. And that
Yeah.
poem really reminds me of perspective, because you can become fixated on the thorns, but you can also smell that rose, and you can also see the beauty in it. You can see it in a totality. And I want to circle back to the news, because I think you may be a step ahead of me, Marie. I stopped watching news in 2020 completely and never started again, except my brother-in-law called us one night to let us know that our son was on TV. But I'm not completely numbed myself to the reality of what is out there. I still see the headlines. I get email notifications, so I know when things are happening. But what I divorced myself from is that energy that there's only doom and gloom in the world, instead of just the hard facts. And so to me, I'm quite sensitive to that. And I think that's part of the reason we started this, because how can you take that school shooting and turn it into hope? I mean, that is so painful, and you cannot ignore it. It's so tremendously big. You cannot ignore it. But how do you take that and turn it into hope? And I think what you and what all of us are doing is to see the world through the beauty and through spreading love, because isn't love the one thing that conquers all?
Exactly. That's beautiful, you know, what you're saying. I'm sorry, did you have more to say, or did
No,
you
go
want me to
ahead.
respond? I have in my book, I have these poems called Real News. There's 3 poems called Real News. And then after I published the book, I wrote a 4th poem about real news in our schools. And it actually is in some ways mundane, or it might seem mundane, you know, in the real news about our schools. It says, you know, faculties and students celebrated their birthdays. You know, a classmate sacrificed lunch and recess to tutor a classmate. So some of these maybe everyday things that are about the love you're talking about, are about the beauty, you know, and that those things are going on too, because I began to see that as someone that I'm not a parent, I don't have kids. In mental health, occasionally I might work with a parent or teacher on a school issue, but I'm kind of separated from the schools in my everyday life. So I actually started following on Facebook the local schools, just so I could see other things that were happening that weren't about school shootings. Like you said, we need to know, and that's kind of what I say at the beginning of the Real News poetry about school, is that we do need to know, you know, when tragedies happening, but there's all these other things that are going on in our communities. You know, in the Real News poems in the book, I talk about, you know, today a baby was born, a hospice patient found peace in hospice. You know, a grocery store worker was given an $80 tip during the pandemic. So these things that are celebrations, and not just the tragedies that are playing out in the world. And the $80 tip, there's actually a story behind it. I went into the grocery store during COVID and was talking to one of the cashiers, and she just happened to mention that one of her coworkers was just given a $80 tip, you know, because somebody just really appreciated all that these essential workers were doing during the pandemic.
And that is that there is so much truth in that. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, when people were very afraid, nurses got so much praise and attention, and granted, they deserved it, right? Because we didn't know what direction it was all heading. And
Mhm.
and I felt really grateful because, yeah, they deserved it, but they deserve it all the time. They do deserve it all the
Mhm.
time.
Mhm.
Um, and yet we started to fall away from that again. And I don't know,
Right.
there are instances that I really shudder when I think about some of the things that nurses have to put up with, um, doctors as well, any frontline worker.
Mhm.
Um, Marina might know this about me, but I have a child in my class whose father is a police officer and whose mom is a nurse. And every morning he asks for prayer for all the frontline workers. So
Mhm.
he's got a little bit of, he's on the spectrum. He's got autism, but he's very high functioning, very high functioning. And so it's like a ritual that we do, which we pray for the doctors, nurses, police officers, ambulance drivers, paramedics, police, STARS ambulance, military, and the Coast Guard. We've added that Coast Guard one in, so it's quite
Mhm.
typical of an autistic. Um, they
Mhm.
perseverate, but it's like, yeah, we are going to be praying for them, because they
Right.
deserve it. They deserve it.
Yes, they deserve it and need it. Yes, I always think that, that anybody who's serving and just giving their hearts and their souls to service just needs our prayers, to be able to do the work they do in whatever line of work, that they're called to.
And I think the three of us for sure, we're called to this. You yourself as a social worker and ordained minister, myself to teaching, and Marina as well to hypnotherapy. Um, we're called for a reason, and for whatever it was from our own childhood, the trauma that we went through, and we already are sensitive and responsive to the pain in others, which it's a gift, but it's also it's a rose, right?
Mhm.
When
Right.
we're so responsive, it's a gift, it's a beauty, it's a beautiful thing, and yet it's born through pain, through our own pain and recovery and continual recovery as we,
Mhm.
as we learn more and we realize that other people hurt as well. And the backstory, like I didn't know that you got burnt. It wasn't in the book.
Mhm.
So, oh goodness, there we have another backstory. And when we can actually take the time to sit with people, to learn about people, to find their backstory, it just makes so much more sense. It always makes more sense about behavior and why they do the things they do. um, I think it's a profound gift that all of us are given that work in this field, in the helping field. And yet it's
Mhm.
also difficult. It's a difficult place
Yeah.
to work with people's pain.
Yes, I think you have, so many good points there. And I love how you describe it as the rose, that there is the thorn, but there's also these other aspects of, living a life of service, of, like we were saying earlier, that self-care is so important because it is difficult when, we're face to face with other people's sufferings or our own sufferings or our own family's sufferings. Yeah, so to be able to, like you were saying, to be able to hold all of it and, do the best we can each day. That's what we're asked to do. And I think to know that we can't, solve all the world's problems. We just have to focus on what's in front of us to do, what's ours to do, and to kind of ask that. My spiritual teacher about Devi, she always encourages me, if you're going to the grocery store, if you're walking down the street, have this perspective of there could be somebody that needs my help, or to have that curiosity even of, well, like, I wonder why I'm here. I wonder, is there going to be somebody that in this moment when I'm walking down the street or at the grocery store, is there somebody that needs my help? Is there somebody that's gonna, teach me something, even if it's, again, back to that, what can seem mundane of going to the grocery store, but, you never know. It could just be as simple as, that simple, I guess I can go back to that story of, going to the grocery store during the pandemic and the cashier saying, oh, this woman was just given an $80 tip. And, isn't that amazing to see, people's generosity?
I agree.
Yeah.
So what's your next project? What's coming up?
Well, thanks for asking. Because as I was telling Marina before we started this YouTube session today, this video session, I actually have written my second book, which is a memoir, and it's a collection of essays. So I haven't published it yet. That's the next step, is being able to publish that book. And I'm realizing, talking to you, I do need to fit in. The one thing I didn't talk about in that book is the burn incident. So I need to somehow fit that into the book, and just to kind of follow up about the burn incident. That it's interesting because I was only 3 years old when I was burned. So until very recently, until a couple years ago, I actually never had any memories of the burn incident. But an interesting thing happened to me as I began working with my current spiritual teacher. I actually had these, I wouldn't call them memories, but I would kind of have I would notice some of these sensations and feelings that went along with that experience at age 3. And I began for the first time to have some dreams that were really directly correlated to the bird incident. So it actually took me over almost 40 years to get to the actual experience of the burn, and to actually have some of that relived so that it could be released. So I just want to mention that in case anybody has gone through, some kind of trauma, either in early childhood or even later in childhood, adolescence, or adulthood. At any point, if you don't have certain experiences, if you can't remember that trauma, that that there might be some day where maybe those memories will come back to be released. And I think the key thing is to have a therapist, a spiritual teacher, somebody, a pastor, someone that you can talk to about those experiences. So I think for me, it was just very miraculous to be able to have those memories and those dreams so that they could be released. And then the other thing that I talk about in the first part of the book that I think relates to what we've been saying today, I talk about how we're each guests in each other's homes, and that we each have these rooms in our house. So for me, the rooms in my house are person with mental illness, social work, Christian community, mystical community, which includes people of all faiths, friends and family. So I think it can be important to have the realization that, some people in the room in my house that's Christian community, they might have very different political ideas, or, people that have, the same political identity as me, they might have very different beliefs or ideas about God than I do. So I think that the backstory of how I came up with this analogy is that in the US there's been so much political divisiveness that for me the analogy really helped me understand, like, I don't have to kick somebody out of my house, but I need to realize that again, like I was saying, that people might feel more comfortable in certain rooms of my house, and there might be friends and family that have that maybe we have different understandings about God or Christianity, and that's okay.
I love that analogy. I think it's phenomenal. And I think that's exactly what the world needs. Because, yes, we have to understand where other people come from and their beliefs. And this is what I love about this Hopenning community, because we have people from different beliefs and not just Christianity that is looking at this, that's watching this, that is getting definitely messages from what you just said, that they're all welcome. It's part of this house. We're all the guests in this house, and we all come from a different perspective. But in this house, there's hope, there's love, there's understanding, there's kindness. So I love that.
Yes.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And I think it also goes back to what Fran was saying, that oftentimes, we don't have the backstory of someone's life if we're meeting them at a party. So, someone might not know that, one of the rooms in my house is a person with mental illness, and, or I might not know that, the parents of Fran's students have a child with autism if I'm meeting them for the same time. So I think that's why it's so important that we notice, how are we talking? What are we saying? For authors, what are we putting in print, so that we can understand that, that we can be sensitive to the issues that matter to that person. Or like you were saying, being welcoming to people of all different faiths. And in my book, Fierce Compassion, Deep Devotion, I do write it from a point of view of, at least my intention is that people of all faiths can pick up the book and feel like it's a book that they can relate to.
I agree. So you're moving from Philadelphia to Connecticut.
Yes.
So, and is there a point to that move? Are you moving to a new job? I didn't get a chance to talk to you too much about that.
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about the move. So I work from home, so I'm not moving because of my job. Most of my spiritual community is in Connecticut, Vermont, and New Hampshire. So I'm moving to Connecticut to actually live in spiritual community and be closer to the spiritual community. And then my family's in Philadelphia. So unlike when I lived in Minnesota and was halfway across the country from my family, I'll just be, 3.5 hours from my family in Philly. So still close by. And, a key thing of moving on from Minnesota is that I can now, Minnesota is just so cold, and glad to have, the milder climates of Philadelphia and Connecticut. So just really appreciating the spring to have so many warm days. The flowers started blooming in March. So that's my story about my move.
We're giggling here because cold to us and cold to people more south than us is a completely different concept.
Minnesota, though, I know Minnesota is cold too. Like we complain, but I think it's justified that people from Minnesota can also feel our pain. But we also are having beautiful days. Marina and I both. I mean, it's that we're getting our longer days back. So,
well, I want to go back to the analogy of the rose. Like even in the cold, even though the cold may be the thorn, there's a tremendous beauty and blessing in the cold as well. So just embracing that.
Yeah.
A lot of people ask me, how do you manage? I keep very busy.
Yes.
So how can our viewers get a hold of you? How can they read your book? How can they follow you? Where can they find you?
Sure. Thanks for asking. Well, in terms of my book, it's available on Amazon. And then it's also available in not just the US Amazon, but the other Amazons. Australia, Canada, England, it's available in various countries. So it's under Fierce Compassion, Deep Devotion. And it's also available online in Barnes and Noble. And then I also have a website, www.mariedimenna.com. And my email address is on the website. I have a meditation class every Saturday that focuses on connecting to the divine within us. And I'm also available for ongoing spiritual counseling as well. And I'm also on Facebook under Marie DiMenna.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Marie. This was lovely. And congratulations on publishing this book. And on the second one, look forward to reading that. Thank you for being with us today and helping us to spread hope. Really appreciate that.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a joy to talk with you both and hear all about, the great work that you're doing to spread hope and to be with individuals and all that they're going through as well. I just really appreciate being here and appreciate the Hopenning community. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you liked our viewing today, our podcast, please subscribe. We're here for you every week. Talk to you soon.